Hello and welcome to Amazing Meetings by Bartosz Zieleśnik and Louis Nichrini, the international podcast for coaches, facilitators and managers. Hello there, I'm Bartosz and welcome to Amazing Meetings episode 6. This time we are virus-proofing small businesses around you with an international speaker and author, Douglas Kruger.
Business survival amounts to one formula, and that is profitability over costs. So long as you can maintain profitability over costs, you are on the right track.
Today, Douglas shares his tips and tricks on how to emerge from the corona crisis stronger and more creative.
The courage to act. We said earlier on that now is the right time to be investing, to be buying a business, to be building a business. It is deeply counterintuitive. Most people are receding, they're shrinking inward. You need to be expanding outward. That takes courage.
We also dig into secrets of Douglas's writing process.
You don't just have one book in you. You will find that every big project you do spurs the next one.
How to virus-proof your small business. That's Amazing Meetings with Louis and Bartosz.
It is April 2020 and we are still in the midst of the coronavirus in a global lockdown, and many companies and businesses are struggling to make ends meet. So on today's show, we are excited to have a specialist come and share some more insights on how to make your business the best that it can be.
Douglas Kruger is a business author and an international speaker on topics of true breakthrough thinking and outstanding insights behind real business innovation. He just released his book, Virus-Proof Your Small Business, which provides 50 ways to survive the current COVID-19 crisis. Tough times call for clever ideas, and we are privileged to have Douglas with us today to share some of these insights. Hello, Douglas.
Such a pleasure to be with you, folks. Hi.
How are you doing these tough days?
Well, we are confined to quarters with a 3-year-old, and I think one of the phrases I've used most often over the past couple of days is, please excuse the dinosaur noises in the background. So that about sums up my scenario. But how are you?
Oh, doing well. And please excuse the squeaky toy noises in the background. And we have Louis with us as well from South Africa. How are you doing, Louis?
I'm doing well. Being confined to quarters with a wife and 2 kids really has its challenges. But I think that's the challenges that many small business owners currently experience. It's being confined to your own space and not being able to do business as usual. So I'm excited about the conversation we're going to have today.
Douglas, let's get this out of the way as soon as we can. There is a book coming out on Friday, if I'm not mistaken, right? On the 10th of April?
That's right.
What is that book about?
All right, so this one was written in record time, and really it's a record for me and it's a record for Penguin, and just a mind-blowing amount of productivity around the world in a short space of time. So what happened was, I think it's now 3 Wednesdays ago, I received an email from the editor of Penguin saying, are you in the market to write a book on how small businesses can survive the COVID crisis? And for one split second, I got this flash of what that entailed and how big that mountain was. And I tried not to think about it too much. I said a quick prayer and I hit yes, respond. And between that Wednesday and the next one, we completed an entire book. So that is, for me, it's book number 9 with Penguin, and it interrupted what would have been book number 9. But it was done in 1 week flat, and it had contributions from all around the world. So a wonderful scenario for a writer in the sense that you simply have people throwing ideas at you. The best ones, the ones that stick, the ones that have universal principles, went straight into the book, and it's done, and it comes out in a couple of days' time.
I just have to ask you this. Look, most of our audience are facilitators, coaches, managers. I'm guessing about 50% of them have a book somewhere in the pipeline, right? There's something coming, because we all create value and we want to encapsulate it, sort of formulate it in something bigger than a workshop. And most of the people I know have had this book in the pipeline for 5 years, 6 years. How exactly do you create a book in a week?
Well, our story begins when 12-year-old Douglas took typing class with Mrs. Home in high school. The sheer mechanics of it, I can actually touch type, which helps Immensely. I can type about as fast as I can speak. So that's the first part of the story. I've had 20 years of practice doing that. The second part is I don't believe in the concept of writing a book one day. From the very first book that I wrote with Penguin, it has been the sort of the nature of my process to go, I have an idea, let's start collecting concepts for the book, ideas for it, chapters, stories, and so forth, and you begin writing more or less immediately. I can recall getting to book number 5 or 6, and one of my friends in the speaking world sat next to me and said, oh gosh, I've always wanted to write a book, and it's so inspiring, I'm going to sit down and do it. And I thought back to 4 books ago, where he said the same thing to me. He said, oh, so inspiring. One day I'm going to sit down and write a book. There is no such thing as one day. And there are actually very simple, very clever things that you can do in order to get rid of that mindset and just to be much more productive about it. For example, don't think of it as a book, something grand that you will do one day. I will write a book. What you do is you think of it as a large essay. That's all it is. You have a topic, an insight, a clever idea, something that helps people. And what you do is you follow a very simple formula. You go, make a point, tell a story. Make another point, tell another story. If you break down global bestsellers like Malcolm Gladwell's books, that's all he does. He makes a profound point and he tells a story that makes it come alive. Or he might transpose that and start with the story and lead up to the point. But that's all it is. And folks like Steven Pinker, who's a cognitive psychologist, gives us some useful insights on that one as well. He says the very best writing simply helps people to see moving imagery in the imagination. So that's all it is. You take your ideas, you aggregate them. I start on my phone. I take out my phone and I start writing down little bullet points of what I think should go in. Typically, then I will listen to a couple of audiobooks to get myself up to speed with the latest literature, add ideas that I might not have thought of, and then I put them in the right order, add the stories, and just get going.
I'm sorry, that was a selfish question on my end, as you can probably tell, right? Because I've had these ideas in my head.
It's a wonderful topic. I mean, we could spend the rest of the day talking about books. I love it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But just by looking at the cover, this book is not selfish at all. This book looks like it's serving the world now.
Yeah. The point behind this one is really to say, what are your fears? What are your problems? What are the crises? Possibly the leading one, and I think this is to the great credit of business owners around the world, is how do I keep my staff going? And I think that's a very generous question to be asking, and it's the right question to be asking. So what I did was I put out a call globally and I said, what are you doing? What have you seen? What works? Let's get the ideas out there as quickly as possible. So again, this one was a fairly easy book to write in the sense that I didn't have to do much research. The ideas simply came to me. And my task then was to separate the principle from the story, to say, all right, that's what you've done in your scenario. How do I distill out the essence of the thing and turn it into a book? So it follows a 50 ways format, 50 ways to answer or respond to this crisis. But the entire formula behind the book is actually relatively simple. It says business survival amounts to one formula, and that is profitability over costs. So long as you can maintain profitability over costs, you are on the right track. And I find that a lot of people, particularly in a panic situation, tend to focus just on one side of that equation, specifically on costs and specifically on keeping them low. And while that is important, it is merely half of the picture. It is entirely possible to conserve yourself into the grave. You also have to look at profitability. Now, the rest of the book says, how do you do that? And in some cases, you simply cannot sell the way that you were doing traditionally. You have to reconfigure, you have to adjust, you have to find clever ways forward. But in essence, that's what the book does. It says, how do you keep your profitability up and your costs low? Simple as that.
So Douglas, if we're looking at facilitators and speakers, I mean, we had a conversation off air just about how that market has shut down in so many different ways.
Yeah.
What would be some of the tips if we're talking about a service type of industry where we need to be client facing, be it facilitators, be it hairdressers, be it, beauticians? If that's the type of industry that you're in, what are some of the tips that you can give for those industries to actually take this time and use it productively?
Absolutely, and it's the right question. In fact, the book is dedicated to professional speakers. I say that this has been among the hardest hit industries, and I wax a little lyrical there where I say we've been telling our tales and sharing our dreams and igniting minds to go further since our audiences first gathered in caves. And I make the point in the dedication where I say, this is not the end. Keep the words flowing and the crowds will grow again. But yes, as to your question, I mean, that is the service industry has been identified as the one that is likely to take the longest to recover. Now, in certain instances, there are simple but clever things that you can do. For example, if you are a gym, you cannot have people in your gym right now. What you can do is you can do Zoom and Skype calls. You can do downloadable podcasts. You can assist people with the weird problems that they're discovering trying to solve that issue at home. For example, if you lift weights regularly, you'll find that it's relatively easy to work things like arms or shoulders. It is massively difficult to get enough weight onto your legs. So simple, clever insights like that. How do you do that? What can you practically do? I popped onto YouTube the other day looking for just that topic, and I saw a guy who had shared a thing on how to do a legs workout at home. He shared it about a week ago, and it's had 3 million views. Now, that in and of itself is a revenue stream if you have monetized your YouTube channel. So there are clever ways of solving people's problems. You may, however, have to ask yourself what is at the core of what you do, because it may not be possible to deliver in the way that you did before. Now, having said that, there are options for delivery available to you. Even in nations where we have lockdown, where it is difficult to travel around, you might, for example, traditionally have had people walk into your store. Well, can you have a drive-through? And can you, for example, have people at your window wearing gloves, offering to do a hygienic non-touch interaction? And specifically, can you advertise that? So when you start to think about it in clever ways, you've got to break it down to what's the core value we offer and how can we do it differently? Now, in many cases, for people like ourselves in the speaking, coaching, and training world, you have the option of working online, but you may not necessarily be able to sell right now. What you might be able to do is to aggregate what Malcolm Gladwell calls tribes of followers. And you can do this across a range of industries, not just ours. For example, if you are a cinema, you can't have people come to the mall, they're not going to buy popcorn, sit down and watch your movie, but you ask yourself, what's at the core of that? It's not just about the movie. In certain instances, it might be about, sort of sci-fi geeks wanting to get together and talk about Star Trek. So are you a logical source, an aggregator of those kinds of people and those kinds of conversations? If you can do that now, it may not represent an immediate sale, but it might represent the beginnings of developing a tribe of followers. So you are welcoming people into your fold, and that makes a big difference. Now, you could also do things like free trials and loss leaders. Forbes magazine had a fascinating insight on groups like LinkedIn, Adobe, and a number of other providers of that nature. U-Haul, in fact, in the States was one of the big ones, who are giving away their services or parts of their services for free. And they're saying things like, well, students need this right now. So for the next couple of months, students do it for free. Audible is another one. In Audible's case, it's absolutely genius. They're saying while school is in lockdown, kids listen for free. When you consider that, their costs have already been met. The production costs are taken care of. Digital costs them nothing. But what they're doing is they are doing a massive trial around the world. Try our product, learn to love us, get used to us, and you won't want to stop on the far side. So there are clever ways of doing it if you're thinking about it strategically.
I think there's more to it because I see that there are many businesses trying to reinvent themselves now. So the local cinema, just literally 500 meters from where I live, they're actually selling advance tickets so that you can buy a ticket for a future screening. And there are communities coming together to support their favorite businesses. So I think there are two sides to this equation. People don't want you to fail. Your customers don't want you to fail in the long run.
One of the most wonderful things I've seen coming out of this, I received a phone call from someone who said, I must tell you a remarkable story. They have an industry association. So for speakers, it might be something equivalent to, say, the NSA or PSA or something down those lines. And this association had already received the payments and the bookings for this year's convention. The attendees got together independently and decided and agreed that they would donate those fees to the association for that year. They said, keep the money, keep the prize money, keep the attendance money, keep the booking fees, just keep it. We want you to survive. I get a little choked up about that. I mean, what a generous and wonderful thing to do. And it just goes to show that, firstly, a couple of principles. The first one is that the business may need to take priority over the customer for a time. It has always been the case that we say customer first and business kind of comes second. For a while, we may need to switch that one so that businesses survive. The second thing is it just shows how wonderfully generous people can be under these circumstances. I know in my nation, for example, people have been asking, how do we support small businesses? How do we keep staff going? And you mentioned things like the vouchers. That's a very good one. We have a service provider in our community that goes around in a van washing dogs. And I mean, that's what the guy does for a living, and it keeps him busy and it keeps the dogs in the neighborhood clean and pampered. And my Jack Russell loves it. She rolls over and shows her tummy. So what we've offered to do is we've said, can we pay now? And then you can come around and service the dogs next week. And that, again, it comes from the customer's side, which is a remarkable thing to do. But it does show that you as the entrepreneur can do that as well. You can say things like, if you would like to book me for the event, if you'd like the coaching, if you'd like whatever the case might be, buy the voucher now at a discount, and then we will service it later. Or even not at a discount. It just gets the cash flow going, and that can be incredibly valuable.
Douglas, there's a lot of industries going online now. Like Bartosz said, a lot of people have now come to the party. I saw a remark the other day where the guy, they were doing a poll of who forced digitization, who led the digitization.
Digitalization? Going digital?
Wait. So that
we're not cutting
the computer thing.
We're not cutting this one out, Louis. You gotta soldier on.
So they asked the question: who led the digitization of your industry and your company? And the options were, my CEO, my CTO, and then everybody made a little tick on COVID-19 because of the times that we're in. So the question that I have is, if our industries are now finding ourselves there and playing catch up, what are some of the fundamental things that we need to look at now to ensure that we position ourselves going forward? Because the one thing that's unmistakable is the world won't be the same after 2020. The way that we do business and interacting won't be the same. So how do we now proactively put things in place for that new reality coming?
That's a great question. In fact, the sort of zoom back question prior to that is, are you diversified? Do you have multiple revenue streams? I mean, for myself right now, speaking is dead. The rest of the year has just been cancelled. We'll see if it picks up again, and I hope it does. But the book sales are keeping me going. The monetized YouTube channel keeps me going. I read my own books for the Audible platform, and that helps as well. So, there are multiple things that you can do. And I know a lot of speakers, coaches, and trainers are doing this, and that's a great way to go. It does throw into stark relief the fact that anything digital is easier to do. If you don't have to go there, it makes the world of difference. And we can get very complex on this topic, but actually a simple starting point is go check your website. Is it up and running? It's surprising how often businesses that have a website and in theory are able to weather this digitally and online haven't gone and checked that the site is actually working. So step number 1, is the site up and functioning? Step number 2, can you order something off the site? If I am your customer, I go to your site and I fill in the subscription form and I try to order something, does it reach you? In a surprising number of cases, we haven't checked on that functionality for a long time and it's not working any longer. Right at the moment, we might be by sort of pulling little faux pas, like we might have a digital email banner or an ad going out that says the top 5 places to visit this year. And that's a little tone deaf. So you want to get rid of things like that. Just make sure that your digital communication is not encouraging people to, say, for example, take a trip to China. That there are no awkward messages going out there. We forget how the world has changed. We forget what's on our site. So do a little update on that. Check that everything's working. For heaven's sake, respond to the form requests. I was surprised prior to this how few companies responded to form requests. It's unforgivable now. Then beyond that, there are other things that we can do, such as just being very active on social media. Are you aggregating tribes? Are you popping up in other places? Are you part of chambers of commerce, industry associations, and so forth? I think in the world of speaking, there's a speaker in London named Alan Stevens who, the second this thing hit, did an online webinar on how to do online webinars. And he, groups like espeakers.com sent out mailing lists saying, have you told your clients you can do what you do online? So there are always creative ways of doing it, but we have to really start thinking about what our core value is. And we also have to learn to be entertaining via the digital medium, which is a whole different ballgame. I was watching he's sort of a political comedian by the name of Steven Crowder in the States. And he's got something like 5.5 million subscribers. And he was having a go at some of the late night comedians in the US trying to do what they do from home and pointing out why they're not good at it. Because they're very accustomed to having sort of reams of script writers and producers and people around them laughing at what they do and creating a vibe. And he points out they simply can't do it to camera. There's a new skill set to be learned there. And getting away from all of the digital considerations, that's the thing that works the best, is are you actually captivating? Are you interesting? Are you entertaining? Do you make it come alive? There we return to what we said earlier about Steven Pinker, the cognitive psychologist, where he said the best communication, best writing, best speaking helps people to see moving imagery in the mind. Now, as speakers and trainers, we know this. We know that you speak in stories rather than in stats. But to what degree are we making that come alive in front of the camera? And then simple little things like, when I look at you in the camera, am I seeing your ceiling fan or am I seeing the rug on the floor? Am I looking up your nose? You know, have you basically learned a little about lighting and sort of charm? Half of charm, and this is such a simple little thing, is it's around the eyes. It's not necessarily about the mouth, it's about switching on your eyes. And here I am looking into this little dot above Louis' head and being as charming as I possibly can. It's a skill we have to learn.
It's wonderful. Speaking of skills, because, I work in the learning and development area. And I've seen a bit of a trend in the world of L&D happen. And it's not this different to what you see in grocery stores. So, in grocery stores, you're not able to buy any potatoes or toilet paper. That's gone. But in the world of online learning and development, I'm observing people panic hoarding and panic buying different skills because it's very easy. You go to Coursera, Udemy, one of the big online providers, and you start hoarding. And some of those companies have seen 300 to 400% growth in consumption of their content. Now, what is happening here, Douglas?
Yeah. Well, perhaps the most charitable answer is people have got downtime and they're using it to learn. And I hope that that's the case. I mean, that would be a great scenario. What's possibly worse than that is when people take the downtime to panic instead of learning. And the reaction becomes kind of one of those Muppets throwing their hands in the air rather than how do I use this time strategically? I think, for example, of a colleague who told me that he's stopped writing his book because everything is so uncertain right now. And I just question what that even means. You've got time in your hands. It's going to pick up on the far side. Why stop writing the book? Isn't now the ideal time to do it? So yes, perhaps there is a increase in the market and maybe even a massive upswing in what we do. The danger to that is that we all end up doing the same thing, that we share the same messages, we teach the same concepts, and it all starts looking a little samey. Perhaps one of the cleverer ways of distinguishing yourself during a time like this is to ask simple questions about the human side of things, entertainment, humor, emotion, and so on and so forth, because it's very tempting during a crisis to say, what's the practical thing we need to do? And I mean, I've done that myself. My book is a simple response to how businesses can survive this. However, it's important not to lose sight of the fact that what we do must entail a great deal of entertainment, humor, charm, and so forth, and that changes things for us exponentially. You may have a small channel competing with, I mentioned Steven Crowder earlier on. They might be incredibly practical, very detailed information, low on entertainment. Steven Crowder comes along, puts in the entertainment, the human factor, 5 million subscribers. It's worth taking note of that.
Douglas, I'm sitting and my head is going at 1,000 miles an hour now, just of all the practical things for me as a business owner that I need to put in place, but also
He's thinking about his website now. I can see that.
But also the reframing just of thoughts and just to understand that it's not business as usual. And what that also means is we can't just carry on doing the things we always did and expect, new outcomes in this new atmosphere. So again, my question I would like to ask is if we're saying we're virus proofing, we're creating a place where if there's external things happening to our company, but there's a core value that still drives us forward, how do we now take that value and find new markets for it? And I understand we give things away for free, and I understand that we create a place and we create tribes, but the fact is, Now in April 2020, there's bills to be paid. What's your advice to small business owners with regards to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, one of the things to be thinking about, this is quite a counterintuitive thought, is that now is the time that people become stupendously wealthy next year. What I mean by that is this. When things are down, if you buy low and sell high, that's the basic formula for wealth. It's this increase in value. So if you do have any spare money lying around, if you have any cash flow, now is the time to be investing either financially or in buying another business, because it is the absolute ideal time to do it. Buy low, sell high. That is the wealth formula. It's very counterintuitive. Most people now kind of try to preserve and to shrink in and to protect. It takes a great deal of courage to actually be building, investing, starting a business now. Weird thing is, it's actually the ideal time to do it if we can get our heads around that concept. Now, in terms of the cash flow thing, it is very industry dependent here, but the answers that we can look at are, again, creative. How do you reconfigure your business? If, for instance, you have some staff, you have a group of people working for you, you may not be able to sell the core thing that you've been selling up until this point. Whether it's for a month, whether it's for the rest of the year, for a time, you may have to find something else to do. So the question then becomes, what is the core skill that you could repurpose? If, for example, you have people who can code, people who can program, people with high-level skills, who else might you serve around the world? And you can look at this in a multiplicity of different ways. For instance, you could either start by hiring out your staff to other organizations and they pay your organization to do a completely different thing with the same skill sets. Or you could simply tell your people, because the cost of employment is too high, let me help you to find alternative temporary online employment doing something for someone else. So it's either a profit generating mechanism, or at the very least, it's a way of maintaining people's salaries. So there are always ways in which you can do this. You know, you can even break it down to the most simple ideas of all, which is, what do you have that you can sell? Right now, other people are trying to buy things cheap to start their businesses and so forth. Do you have old kettles, water coolers, air conditioners that are sitting around doing nothing? Cash flow is the important thing right now. However, probably the cleverest, most practical thing is either to find a way to deliver. I mean, delivery is just king of the world at the moment. Or a creative work around that, such as a drive-through, a collections window, something of that nature. Or you could pool clients. And here's what I mean by that. If people are hesitant to spend, perhaps they don't have the cash flow, could you aggregate all of your clients together and serve them in bulk? So each one is paying less, but they can collectively afford you. It's a good deal for them. It's a good deal for you. It's just about creative ways of thinking about keeping the cash flow going.
I think one of the biggest challenges for many companies is actually now to say that the world literally is your oyster, to start thinking international and going like, it's not geographical anymore. If you have a service to deliver that can be digitized, you have a market in Argentina and in Russia all at the same time, and to be able to actually deliver that. And that type of mindset shift, I think for small business owners, many a times is quite a big stretch.
Yes. And Louis, let's just stop there, because that's actually quite an important point. I mean, if you think about when you approach that as a small business owner who's been operating in a specific locality, it's a very threatening thought. You go, well, I don't know how to approach someone in Argentina. I don't even know where to begin. All right, let's simplify that. I have, for example, a monetized YouTube channel. Now, I'm not approaching anyone in Argentina. I make a little daily YouTube video. Everyone who clicks on it, I get a couple of cents. And there you go. I'm selling around the world. I always love the example of Forbes' third wealthiest posthumous celebrity, which is a very fancy way of saying their third richest celebrity dead guy. And you probably guessed the first two names. It's Michael Jackson and Elvis Presley. Very few people guess number three. Most people think someone from the Beatles. Turns out it's not. It's a guy by the name of Charles M. Schulz. And he is the author of
Peanuts.
Yeah. He drew the Peanuts comic strip. Now, let me run you through his working day. He would wake up in the morning. He would draw 1 hour. 1 hour, he would draw a cartoon strip. He would eat a bagel. We're done. That's it. Okay? That was his working day. And he sold that cartoon via syndication to some 10,000 newspapers around the world. And in the same way that every click on a YouTube video is a few cents, that was a few dollars to him every single time it was published. But we're not done. You get to the end of the year, and booksellers, publishers, aggregate all of those cartoons for the year, turn them into a little book and sell them in 10,000 bookstores around the world. Now, you do that for 50 years, and you add in the television rights and the greeting cards and toys and so forth, and he ended up wealthier than the two late members of the Beatles. So there are ways of thinking about this idea. Selling around the world can mean that you offer to produce something that was previously produced in China, but it could also mean that you do something that is digital or something that you make once and sell multiple times, like a song, a book, a comic strip, a course, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm. So what would you say to the very beginners out there? Because I think you have about 80,000 subscribers on YouTube channel, if I'm not mistaken, as of April. Yeah, I loved your workout video from your shed. You guys, you have got to see that. If you're not a subscriber, it's worth it. It earned my subscription from all of my fake accounts. So,
thank you very much.
Absolutely love this one. You can actually see Douglas working out in his shed with a backpack full of bricks, if I'm not mistaken. Oh.
The most pitiful workout of all time. It was so sad that I had to film it.
I loved it. So you have a working channel, a portfolio of books, many different streams. But I imagine there's someone listening to this show right now thinking to themselves, but I've got nothing. So how... Yeah. But maybe what I think would be useful if we come back to your beginnings. How did that start for you? Do you remember?
Right, let's start on a deep galactic level, and then we'll sort of backtrack.
The Big Bang, many.
Yes, the big picture idea. Okay, there is an economist by the name of Thomas Sowell, and he makes a simple but profound point. He says, there is nothing interesting to study in poverty. He says, what's interesting is how wealth is generated. And the point he makes is, he says, everyone starts at zero. Every nation at some point started at zero. Every family, every tribe, every business, every entrepreneur at some point begins at zero. Zero is not interesting. What's interesting is how you get to one. The creation of, the making of. So now going down to a sort of a personal level, if you are starting from zero, congratulations, you're starting where everyone started. It's not a bad thing. The question is, how do you begin to make the first instances of what you do? And I believe that here, perfection actually becomes the enemy of productivity. My YouTube channel, for example, I only monetized it toward the end of last year because I wasn't even aware that it was a thing you could do. One of my videos went viral, and I realized that I had what YouTube calls enough watched hours that you then can apply to have it monetized. I did it because I loved it. It was just a thing to do, to show the speaking, to show what I do, how I think, and so forth. And I suspect that may be the key to the thing. When we sit down and we go, all right, let me plan out a 10-year corporate strategy, we're thinking with an awfully cold mindset. However, when we go, what do I love? What moves me? What changes lives for people? What's my thing? And you allow your personality to shine through, that sense of mission and so forth. I think that has a very different energy. And it's the kind of thing that is attractive to people who are reading, listening, watching what you do. You start again to aggregate these sort of tribes of followers. I don't know that it's possible to aggregate tribes of followers around a business formula. I do think it's possible to aggregate them around a personality. When I talk on the topic of how to position yourself as an expert, I always say it exists at the intersection of three qualities. It's the knowledge, it's the personality, and it's the publicity. So a lot of people get stuck on those two. It's sort of the knowledge and the publicity. You've got to know things and you've got to tell the world about it. Well, yes, but when you look at the icons in any industry, these are high personality individuals. From Britain, you might say the Clarkson of cars. From the United States, it's the Oprah of TV. It's the Arnold Schwarzenegger of bodybuilding. The Stephen King of horror novels, and so on and so forth. So it's never just a dry process that becomes famous. It is almost always a human being. If you're just getting started, bring the best of you, show your personality to the world, and keep on producing. There are also time equations at play here. I mean, just for example, again, the YouTube channel, I had it for years before it took off. For probably 7 or 8 years, I think, it had under 1,000 subscribers. In the last few months, it's done that. So it really is a game of patience and of slowly building. Now, there are obviously things you can do to accelerate that process. I didn't study YouTube as a medium. If you are taking it seriously, go onto YouTube and look for things like how to set up a room, how to light it properly, how to get good sound, what the top YouTube channels do differently that helps them to add subscribers and so forth. There are very simple, very practical things you can do to accelerate the process. But at the heart and soul of it, it's get started and bring the best of you.
I agree. I think the way we set up our recording studio is also mostly based on the knowledge captured by the lovely, generous people of the internet. Right? I think I shared like 10 videos with Louis, right, with how to do the setup after sort of watching them myself. So there is a certain virality to that content. So if you know someone who could benefit from what you saw, sharing is super easy. So I completely subscribe to your idea of just being generous and being yourself.
In our industry, it works uniquely well. And the reason I say that is we sell an intangible. We sell the respect people have for speakers, coaches, trainers, etc. And that respect is based on how globally excellent we are. So there is no downside to sharing how to be better at what we do. People are not going to book you for every single convention because it simply doesn't work that way. But if the next speaker along is just as good as you, or at least very good, very professional, offers excellent value, and simply knows what they're doing, the buyers in our market say, this is worth it. We're getting good value. So we are uniquely positioned in a non-zero sum game. The more we help each other, the greater the perceived value of what we do.
And this very crisis, I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are, because we had major catastrophes in the history of humankind generally reshape the way we do business, we communicate, create new, I would say, national memories that are shared and treasured, sometimes dreaded. But ultimately, it all came down to reforming the way we live. How do you think this current crisis, will impact the world of small business?
I think a couple of fairly obvious things. For starters, we're going to question how much time we spend in meetings. And in fact, in the book, I give your starting point. I say, orient your thinking by aggregating your numbers and figuring out what's up and what's down and so forth. And then I say, second idea is negotiable. If you have a strategic team and there is value in doing it, call a crisis meeting and start to talk about what's changed in your world. And then I say, however, if the nature of your industry is that your people can simply be left to carry on working and producing, don't call a crisis meeting. You are simply gumming up the works. I think we're suffering paralysis by Zoom at the moment. And I think the value is actually extraordinarily low. In a lot of cases, we could simply get on with our work and send emails among ourselves. It does not have to be a meeting. So time in traffic and meetings, I think there's going to be a lot of question marks around that one. I think on the biggest level, made in China is going to be a very big question mark. How much of what we do is going to come out of China after this? What's the level of damage to their brand reputation, etc., etc.? And I think possibly an upside to this is that one of the keys to wealth is efficiency. The degree to which you can be efficient with resources frees up profitability. If you are inefficient, it takes a lot of time, a lot of resources to make and sell a thing. You make very little on the far end. If you can do the same thing and offer the same value using less time and less resources, it frees up more profit. That spurs further creativity, further innovation, further profitability for the business owner. And I think that is an excellent thing. Not many people know this, but between 2010 and 2019, we actually had one of the most prosperous 10 years in all of human history. We lifted almost 1 billion people out of extreme poverty. Now, of course, there is still poverty in places around the world, but as a proportion and as a percentage, it has almost been eradicated from the species, or at least up until 2020. We'll see what this does to economies around the world. So the degree to which we increase efficiency and we actually spur on more of this business and profitability and so on is the degree to which we eradicate poverty. And that's a fabulous thing. Possibly another thing worth keeping an eye on here is whether or not the burden of regulation goes up or down. Here's what I mean by that. In South Africa, we are ranked something like 110th in terms of business regulations. It is our worst economic problem. We compete very roughly against a nation like India. It forms part of the BRICS region of nations. And India is doing the opposite. They are repealing business laws virtually wholesale. Their economy is doing this, and ours is kind of doing the opposite. So you can see the results directly. Now, the question mark here is, will governments succumb to the temptation to impose more rules? Because they are very much enjoying how much control they have over us at the moment. Or will they see the value of saying, look, we need businesses to produce, we need them to have the freedom to do, let's lower the burden. The United States is doing some very clever ones with this, particularly in the health sector. They're asking very clever questions about which rules can simply be dismissed right now. And that just allows things to move faster. If we can appeal to our authorities and say, look, for now, can we ease up on the regulations? That'll make a world of difference.
Douglas, just to add to that, if I'm a business owner and we're going through the COVID and we get to 2021, what are some of the practical rules and regulations within companies that we can reassess and go like, I don't know if that's relevant anymore? What are some of the business as usual aspects that we can address to have a more reactive company going forward?
Yes. And Louis, I mean, that's a topic close to my own heart. I mean, as you know, one of my books is called They're Your Rules, Break Them, 50 Ways to Smash Silos, Bust Bureaucracy, Create a High-Performance Culture. So the whole concept behind that, it's a very simple philosophy. It says rules do not go away by themselves. If you have any complex system, a village, an organization, a nation, what logically happens is that over time the rules build, they increase, they don't just go away by their own virtue. You have to have human intelligence look at the rules and say, why do we do things the way they've always been done? Louis, you know, one of our fellow speakers is a gentleman named Steph Duplessis, and he uses the simple example that really just captures the whole thing here of the monkeys in a cage. You put a bunch of monkeys in a cage, every time they reach for a banana, they get a zap, and you slowly replace the monkeys until there are no new monkeys in that cage, or none of the original ones, and only none of those new monkeys have ever been zapped. And they don't know why, but they won't reach for the banana. Now, that's this kind of cultural conditioning that goes, we do it this way because it's always been done this way. A prime example of that is the format that a lot of public schools use. You line up in the morning outside of a classroom, the teacher rings the bell or the foreman blows the whistle. You sit down in neat lines on a factory floor, or a classroom floor. The teacher rings the bell, the foreman blows a whistle, and it follows the exact format of an Industrial Revolution era factory. Now, we look at that and we go, well, come on, that's just the way a school works. And the reality of it is it's not. Our schools are designed that way, were designed that way a couple of 100 years ago to create the right type of discipline, format, and thinking for an Industrial Revolution era factory. Now, I'm not just an anarchist. I don't believe in getting rid of values and traditions, but I do like to get rid of processes that have become defunct. And as I say, that takes conscious thought. It doesn't happen unless someone takes a hatchet to it and says, why do we do it this way?
So Douglas, if you had to give some advice, what are some of the big topics that business owners need to reassess when we come out of this? What are some of the topics or some of the practices currently in companies that they would need to reassess to go forward?
Okay, so one of the questions you can ask yourself there is, what's the laziest thinking you can practice? By which I mean, instead of all of the steps that you've been taking traditionally, you say, couldn't we just? And a prime example of that one, for instance, is that bankers did not invent PayPal, because a banker does not think that way. PayPal is a lazy product. It goes, I couldn't be bothered with all of this. Couldn't we just? And that takes some radical thinking. You need to get a group of people together and go, what's the core thing we offer? What's the core thing we do? Now, if we were forbidden from doing it the way we've always done it, and we had to do something lazy and quick, what could we do? Couldn't we just? And fill in the answer to that question. That is true industry innovation and revolution. And it's not more complex, it's less complex.
I absolutely love the way you introduce this disruption here in a very sort of gentlemanly manner, because I think at the end of the day, we're actually witnessing the fight of common sense against years and years of history that we had. And I love Seth Godin's formula. People like us do things like this. And we're finding now more than ever that this very formula is being disrupted. So schools are a great example, and I love the fact that you mentioned it. So how is your home school working now?
Okay.
How's that disruption?
It has been uniquely challenging. I mean, I do a YouTube video every day, and just to get the audio for that without this kind of screaming, clanking, bashing, and so forth, it's just the most incredible thing. I'm actually trying to do the audio version of the new book at the moment, and I can't do it during the day. I have to wait until the little guy goes to sleep. I must say, though, I'm deeply enjoying spending the time with him. But one of my friends on Facebook actually pointed something interesting out. He says, when you have two parents at home and the kid at home, it is not that the parents' parenting load has doubled. It goes up more than that. Because you would have had a natural period during the day when they were at school, and it's not as though now one parent is taking over where two parents operated before. Instead, you are trying to do an entire day. So one of the things to sort of get your head around is just to appreciate this has become exponentially harder. However, I think it's possibly also had a humanizing effect. I mean, you think back to about a year ago with that BBC video and the little kid who comes wandering in. It's become so normal now. We're working around families, and that's okay. Nothing wrong with that.
Absolutely. I absolutely love the pets and the kids, and I love how people embrace it now. I think, as you said, this is a very humanizing thing to our... I think video conferencing has so much potential, but we haven't really been showing the human face, and we haven't. I mean, it's always suffered the reputation of being not able to connect us as well as a face-to-face meeting. So I personally had to fly across the world to have a 1-hour business meeting with someone just to get the relationship going. And I think this is ultimately the way of just. I mean, most of our airline listeners are not going to be happy about this, but I think this is one of the industries that's going to be really disrupted in the long term by people finally figuring out how to do a good teleconference.
Yes, and it's amazing how it's often not the technology that is the key issue. It's the clarity of thinking. I mean, for example, yesterday I had a briefing meeting for an upcoming online meeting. And the gentleman, bless him, who ran the meeting, took about 15 minutes to kind of waffle through what could have been said succinctly in 45 seconds. And I think there are some very deeply human skills there about how to organize your thinking, express yourself clearly, and get on with it. And I think we are going to have to learn those skills in a hurry where we haven't.
Douglas, so just within that, talking succinctly and getting down to business, that kind of, we can get the skills to do that. When we talk about business as well, it's about relationships. It's about understanding and knowing your clients and spending time with them. Bartos just said he would fly to go and have coffee and time with that person to really spend that. How do we, in this time that we're currently in, what do we put in place to make sure that the relationship part of the businesses that we're in still are maintained?
You know, Louis, about the best thing we can do is share nudes on WhatsApp. I mean, beyond that, I got nothing.
Not again, man. Not again. You in the shed, not again.
By the way, I just got yours. It just came through. That's not bad, if I'm being honest. So.
Okay, the rating for the show just came up, so it's PG.
Louis, it's a very good question to which I don't have an immediate answer. I mean, this is very much of a new reality. So that's one that we're simply going to have to learn. We start with the very basics, like, are you organizing your camera correctly so that people can see you, the lighting and so forth? And earlier on, we discussed charm into camera. But it's a good question, and I don't have a simple, clear answer to that one.
Bartos, any response from your side?
This brings back the memories of the video by Douglas Kruger. You might know the guy. In one of your videos that's actually available on YouTube, you share a thought around what is the most, I'm not sure if I'm phrasing this correctly. What is the highest impact skill you can acquire? And you answer by saying this is public speaking.
Yep. In fact, that was Forbes magazine. They put together an article where they said, of the various skill sets that you can invest in, which one has the most immediate impact upon your career growth, your potential for leadership, and your promotion capacity? And they said public speaking by miles.
So do you think the current reality now still supports that claim?
Oh, yes, I would say even more so. And I think when you look at what's happening underneath the waters there, it's not public speaking per se. Speaking and writing are very similar media in what they really amount to is good speaking and good writing are good thinking. Are you able to think well? Are you able to organize your thoughts to express yourself well? One of the older formats in terms of high school education that I worry is perhaps being disregarded is the ability to write an essay. And hear me out on this one. I think that the capacity to take an idea, turn it into a theme, introduce it, develop it, reach conclusions, and end is one of the absolute fundamentals that a human being needs to operate in the world. It's basically how to think well and express yourself well. And I do believe that people who can do that will naturally become the leadership of tomorrow. Perhaps even more so online, because there is less opportunity for fluff. There's less opportunity for background politics and maneuvering. It really comes down to clear thinking only.
Wow. You know, I read this thing in Harvard Business Review a few weeks ago, which states that if you take a BA, like a bachelor's degree now, so if you commit, I'm not sure how long that is in South Africa. In Poland's about 3 years.
3 years.
Yeah. Depends, right? So but let's assume it's 3 years. The shelf life of that degree is 5 years.
Yeah. So what you're getting is the how to think, not necessarily the specific knowledge.
Exactly. But I think there's still value unlocked in undergoing that process, right? And having that project in place, in showing up to the class and learning the structures. But I'm quite curious about your outlook on the formal education out there in the world.
Do you know, funny enough, I end the book with that topic where I do a little bit of speculating. The book is incredibly practical. Right at the end, I indulge in a couple of seconds of philosophy and I say, what might change? And I actually pick on universities where I say, you know, for decades now, they've been teaching what we might call ideology rather than education. And they have become something like 1,000-fold more expensive than they were in 1975. There are a lot of interesting reasons for that, but that's the end result of it. And you kind of raise the question where you say, in a world in which you yourself and your child can work effectively and earn a lot of money without a varsity degree, are you still happy to spend 4 years paying for them to be indoctrinated in some kind of outdated Marxism at exorbitant fees? And I go, I don't think that's going to last. I don't think it's going to stand the test of time.
Well, not if you put it that way, right?
They don't. It's not in the brochure like that, but you know, people are catching on.
You can go, the name of the university, the least Marxist institution. Okay.
I'd go to that one.
Just a marketing idea for all of our university deans out there.
I think of a book called Excellent Sheep by William, I think it's Dereshowitz. And I mean, that's a great exploration of that topic where he basically, it's an indictment of education where he says, we're no longer teaching people how to think, we're teaching them basically to regurgitate. And I think there's a lot to be said about that.
So Douglas, taking that into account, one of the conversations Bartosz and I regularly have is a personal development plan. It's for me as an individual, I need to identify some of the skills that I need to be better at my job, to be better, in relationships or whatever the case might be. In reaction to where we are now, and in preparation for what is to come, what are some of the core skills that you think entrepreneurs and small business owners need to invest in now to make them better going forward?
Okay. The first one is the courage to act. We said earlier on that now is the right time to be investing, to be buying a business, to be building a business. It is deeply counterintuitive. Most people are receding. They're shrinking inward. You need to be expanding outward. That takes courage. The phrase to bear in mind there is rich is abnormal. The very word rich means a departure from the norm. It means you are not acting or thinking or speaking like everybody else. You are taking the initiative to do something differently. Beyond that, in our particular world, and I mean, this is my thing and what I love, is it's that personality that drives your brand. And what I would do there is I would specifically study high personality brand aggregators. And again, from the UK, Jeremy Clarkson, Top Gear, and so forth. And what you're doing there is you're not saying, how do I be him? The last thing you want to do is to try to copy a personality. Instead, you want to be asking the question, what does he do? And what he does is he ruffles feathers, he speaks his mind, he speaks in entertaining ways, he develops little picture stories in his language. There is much that you can actually break down into formula and say, there's a lot going on beneath the surface that I can learn from and I can emulate with my own personality. So it's not about, again, it's not duplication of personality, it's understanding what's going on beneath the surface. And you will find it all over the show. For example, if you watch Nigella Lawson, one of the world-famous chefs, again out of the UK, there was an interesting interview with her on Time magazine a few years ago. Time did a sort of a live interview, and they asked her, what was your guiding inspiration? And she was very candid. She said, when I was about 17 years old, I had this mental image, this sort of utopian ideal of a Italian goddess. And she said, that to me, that picture is what I aim at. And I think that's a very telling insight, that she's come up with this sort of persona, and that's what she does. If you watch the shows and think about that, you will see it everywhere. Now, there again, that's that separation between someone who does a cooking show versus a global personality. So it's those kinds of things that we're looking for. What is the psychology behind the scenes? How do we do that on purpose using our own driving persona?
I'm interested because, I watched a couple of your YouTube videos and I read through the comments section. And what's interesting is to show that how people show you nothing but love. That's absolutely amazing.
Oh, goodness.
Have you noticed?
I'm delighted to hear that. I don't go there because I'm terrified.
Most people, like, one video I published on YouTube was, I hate this guy, thumbs down. That was my YouTube career in a nutshell. Maybe because it was me driving a 30-year-old Volvo through Bulgaria. Maybe.
And Jeremy Clarkson
However,
does
I hate
that
this
and
guy.
everybody loves him.
I hate this guy. So, not exactly Top Gear, but in your comments, people I can see that many of your YouTube fans, they look up to you and they say, I want to speak like this guy. I want to have a presence on stage like this guy.
Well, thank you, and I do appreciate that. And
you don't need to think that. This is the stuff that people say. The question is it something that, are you following a persona here? Are you creating your own thing? What does the backstage look like?
No, I don't think so. I think by this stage, I'm comfortable enough in front of audiences and in front of cameras that I simply let Doug do what he does. And thank you very much for the kind feedback there. I must also just point out, though, that there is almost a danger in needing the love of an audience. I think one of the things that people like Jeremy Clarkson do is they don't care if they are divisive. Now, that's not necessarily the same thing as saying go out there and offend people. But it is saying, take your stand, speak strong, don't do it for the love of the audience. Stephen King echoed this one, and it's a thought that stayed with me for many years. He said, when you are writing your story, don't write as though your kindly aunt is going to read it, because then you will nicify everything. He uses the metaphor, he says, write with the door closed as though you have total privacy, then open it to the world. And I think there's something very profound about that. It's saying the way you think, do it fully and with integrity, and then show it to the world, which entails that you're going to get some dislikes on your YouTube videos, and that doesn't matter. Clarkson, half the world loves him, half the world wants to burn him at the stake. He doesn't care.
I think we're in a very unique situation now where the door is physically closed, where we have the opportunity now to actually be in a place of creative thinking and coming up with new ideas and exploring some of the ideas that we never have. Doug, just some tips from you. People that are thinking about things that the book that they haven't written in 5 years, the online course that they haven't launched. What are some of the practical things that they need to put in place just to get going?
Don't let another December arrive without that book under your belt, for crying out loud. It's not about one day writing a book. It's about getting to book number 3, 4, and 5. And the fascinating thing, and I think this helps to vacuum some of the fear out of the scenario, you don't just have one book in you. You will find that every big project you do spurs the next one. For example, when I started out, I did not think of myself as operating in the wealth space. I spoke on sort of innovation, motivational topics, that kind of thing. I wrote the first book for Penguin titled, Is Your Thinking Keeping You Poor? And while I was writing it, my fear was, do I have enough to say on this topic? By the time I was at the end of the book, I had the next 2 books on wealth planned. That's how it works. The more you produce, the more you create, the more you learn, and the more it spurs and draws from you. So please, for heaven's sake, don't think of writing a book as a long-term project or creating a course as a long-term project. It's one of those things you do this month so that you can get on to the next thing. And each thing you do makes you better, makes you richer, makes you a more productive and fruitful reservoir of ideas. So it's not like once you've gotten rid of the idea, it's gone and you have less. The ideas get into you and you grow more. Get on with it, for heaven's sake.
I just want to echo that. I think we're on episode 6 of our podcast now. So Bartosz and I had the opportunity to meet about a year ago, and we just kind of hit it off as friends, and we had this conversation, and we started quick and dirty. Bartosz, is that how we will describe it? Quick and dirty, our first couple of ones?
Slow and dirty, to be precise. But
I'm a married man, guys. I'm not sure I want to hear about it.
But the more we got into it, it's like you said, there's a sense of achievement. There's a sense of I'm looking forward to this. There's a sense of ease that comes into that, and
it creates energy.
Yeah, and as soon as we reach that, there's a new level that comes to the fore. And like, okay, how do we make this even better? How do we make this even more? So I think on the one hand, if we are now in isolation, if you are sitting alone at your desk, finding yourself with the 2 hours that you would usually spend in traffic, and you don't have a podcast that you want to listen to just take the time and just kind of start to get the thoughts out, to put something on paper, to kind of create something with the thoughts in your mind.
At the simplest human level, don't shrink, expand.
Exactly. I also agree that creativity can be the antidote for the uncertainty of the current times. I don't know about what your LinkedIn feeds look like, but mine are full of what I call productivity porn, where everyone's like, despite the adversity, we're delivering 150% of, I think, and I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but I have I feel a bit of a discomfort when I look at posts like that, when people brag about how productive they are. So what I really like about our conversation here and the different themes that we explore, that there is method to this madness. So you can do certain things, but don't necessarily go bragging and expect people to show the love suddenly. But also that there are steps you can take that will make you feel more at peace with the current events.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you what, as much as I'm seeing the productivity porn too, I'll still take that over the sort of the river of woe is me, we're all so broken together. I can't stand that. I mean, granted we have a crisis, and it is a global crisis. And I mean, for a very small percentage of people, this is an extraordinarily serious situation. For the vast majority of us, we're sitting at home watching Netflix. I mean, this is not storming the beach at Normandy. Chin up, let's get on with it.
Well, Douglas, I'm curious about your process, right? Because, writing, as you mentioned, 8 or 9 books, I counted 9. So what does your day look like?
Okay, so I do a daily YouTube video every day, and I try to, from time to time, shoot 3 or 4 of them in one go so that I can get the rest of the week done. However, it doesn't always work out that way. Again, just trying to work around my 3-year-old at home and so forth. During the lockdown, I haven't been able to shoot multiple videos. I've been doing 1 per day. In terms of the writing itself, I find that chunks of about an hour to 90 minutes are probably about ideal. You sit down, you focus, and you really go for it, with no distractions, for 60 to 90 minutes. There's research behind the idea that 90 minutes is an ideal chunk in terms of human concentration. The book itself, I divide all of my books into these 50 ways. So I start by going through the literature of the topic matter. Let's say, for instance, the book that I was busy with until this one interrupted was fallacies around wealth, as in ideas that everyone believes that are simply not true. One example of that would be the phrase, the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. If you look at how the world economies are working, it's simply not true. The rich are getting richer in a hurry, the poor are getting richer too. So simple ideas like that. What I'll then do is I will listen to maybe 5 or 6 books on Audible, and I will listen to them at either 1.5 times or double times speed, because I'm looking for ideas. And that helps me to get through a lot of literature very quickly. Where I find, say, a direct quote that I want, I will pause the book there, I will attribute the author, write it down exactly as it is, or where it's just a general idea that I want to discuss, I will make a mental note for myself. I then end up with lots of bullet points. I take the bullet points and I go, all right, what order do I put them in? What goes first, what goes last? And then for each one, it's the public speaking formula. Make a point, tell a story. Make a point, tell a story. Fill in the blanks as best you can. And I do then, in fact, now that I think about it, I also use what we call the PSA formula, which is point, story, application. So it might be, for example, here's the point, here's the topic. Now let's explore it with a story. Now here's what you can do with it. On to the next point. And that's basically my process.
Nice, sweet and simple. I love it.
Yeah, repeat.
I encourage our listeners to steal it. I mean, borrow it a little bit. Maybe we'll see those
Absolutely,
books appear. We'd love to be the moment, the sign that you've been waiting for. This is it. In 3, 2, 1, here's the sign. Boom. Absolutely.
Yes.
Douglas, so if our listeners wants to get hold of you, get hold of your content, your books, your videos, where do they go? Where do they find out more about who you are?
Great stuff. Well, the book is being published all around the world. It's being published in ebook form in nations like ours that are on lockdown where they simply can't do the print version. I believe it goes live on the 10th. Amazon is already taking pre-orders. It's called Virus Proof Your Small Business. Look for Douglas Kruger. Alternatively, all of the books are available from Audible, or go to my website, douglaskruger.com. And I'm also sharing ideas from the book prior to its release and have been for a couple of weeks now. And there, again, the goal is just to get the concepts out, because this is not a zero-sum game. If everyone prospers, then everything keeps running, and that's what we're after. So From Amateur to Expert is the name of my daily YouTube video. And again, share it broadly. If you have ideas that work, share them with others.
Thank you, Douglas. Thank you so much for sharing this. For all of you out there curious about Douglas's work, you can find his links to his social media, social feeds, LinkedIn, and what have you in the show notes below. And at this point, I would like to thank you very much for stopping the work on the previous book and actually producing this thing that's so needed and so to the point and responding to the need in the way you can, which is I think it's a wonderful service. So guys, the book comes highly recommended from Louis and Bartosz.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it. Great stuff. Before we go, Louis, say digitalisation.
Putting things online.
Cheers, gentlemen. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Louis, we've just had our session with Douglas Kruger on virus-proofing our small businesses. What are your key takeaways from that session?
I think Douglas shared so much relevant information on a variety of things, from hunkering down and just getting the work done, and his whole philosophy about writing books. I think for me, the core takeaway for me now is what to do now, and that's really to make sure that you are online and that you're online well represented, that your website is ready to go, that you're active on social media, that you are putting yourself front of mind for people, that when the opportunity does come again for us to do business, that we are ready to do that. So on the one hand, it's learning new skills and putting ourselves out there and marketing or showing ourselves and showing our personality, so that when the opportunity does come later on, it's just a progression from where we are now. We're being forced to do this, but I think forced is also a nice way of saying you are helping your child to walk. You're learning and teaching him a new skill that will be invaluable going forward. So even if it's getting up and falling down and getting up and falling down, we don't let our children stop and just keep on crawling. So I think we're in a position now to say, yeah, let's get up, let's start walking, let's start exploring, let's start seeing what other opportunities are out there. And I really appreciated the insights that Douglas shared, just with regards to the small things we can do today to ensure that we are that we're ready for when this crisis is over. Bartosz, and yourself, what did you take away from this?
Well, I felt reassured much more than before actually doing the show with Douglas that, there is hope. There is light at the end of the tunnel. We will emerge stronger in terms of the skills that we look out for, right? I liked his structured, reasonable approach to acquiring new skills, to thinking how your business operates, starting with the basics, rather than panic buying skills, sort of riding the inspiration wave. So I absolutely loved the fact that he is a practical guy, like 100%. The advice he gave us was about actually structuring what you do. And I also appreciated his advice about how to engineer your own book writing process. I think sometimes we're paralyzed by the big idea and we procrastinate on it because there's just so much to do. But it turns out if you start with the basics, get your website up, have a process in place, have a disciplined approach where you write for 90 minutes every day, set the clock, distraction free, this could actually bring in some wonderful results. And virus-proofing your business is actually within reach. I'm not saying it's easy, but Douglas convinced me that it's perfectly doable even now.
So that's our show for this week. If you found value from that, please make sure to share us with everybody that might be interested in finding out more about everything to do to have amazing meetings, be it in front of people or online. From South Africa, this is Louis signing off.
And from Poland, this is Bartosz signing up. Thank you for listening to our show. If you have a question or you'd like to be interviewed, drop us a line at ask@amazingmeetings.org. That's ask@amazingmeetings.org. Thanks for listening. Till the next time.